It's the Out the Box Rugby podcast with André Pretorius and Envia Velman, only on Megafoon Rugby.
Welcome to the Out the Box Rugby podcast. My pleasure to welcome back André Pretorius, our usual contributor, but also Wihan van der Riet, man better known as Rocketfoot, the owner and starter of Rocketfoot Academy. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be focusing on kicking techniques and the likes. But before we get to that, let's quickly say hi to André and then welcome to Wihan, the new dad. Well, congratulations from our side as well.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Very excited for a little boy in the house.
André, just quickly put it into context. I don't know if you watched the previous video where we spoke to Wihan. I'm going to put the link to that video up on the screen here. Wihan used to play some rugby, but he ended up in America playing American football as a kicker. What do you call it in English? Punter? I'm not sure what you call it. So just briefly, Wihan, just tell us why we're talking to you about kicking specifically. And then I'm going to leave you guys to get to it, because André is the kicking guru himself. And between the two of you, you're gonna figure it out. Just Wihan, how did you get into kicking and what makes you an expert?
Thank you. Yeah. Just kicking has allowed me to go on a journey for the past 10 years, and I kind of developed this passion for kicking technique, and in the process met a whole bunch of experts. It's not like I made any of this stuff up. Over the course of 10 years, I've gotten to work with some of the best in the world, not just in the rugby industry, but also overseas in the United States. And I've taken everything that I've learned from that and almost, what can I say, plagiarized ProForm kicking and sort of found ways to transition it into rugby, and seen really good results. And yeah, I'm not a big name or anything like that, but the stuff that we teach and the stuff that we do, it really does work. And it's a shift in the way that you think about kicking. It's a complete different paradigm, and I think it's really interesting. And I think to me, it's the future of goal kicking. I think it's just going to take a little bit of time, but once it catches on, I think people are going to really understand what we're doing and what we're talking about. So yeah.
Before we continue, I just want to make sure we're going to do this video in two parts. So this video, André is going to go into a manual that Wihan has written about ProForm kicking. It goes into great detail. André is going to, ask some questions and try and get a better understanding of it. And next time, we're going to be talking about specific players that have problems kicking. For example, we're going to be looking at Mani Lobok, what we think, or Wihan thinks is wrong with his technique and how it can be fixed. So look forward to that one. So as I mentioned just now, you wrote a little book, a little manual that's part of a big manual, that's part of your coaching technique. So if people want to get in touch with you to for some coaching classes, like, we're going to put the details down in the description, contact details, phone numbers and the likes. And when they contact you, Wihan, just tell me briefly, how does it work? They get this manual that you've written, and also you give video lessons online. How do you teach these these players to kick?
Yeah, so I think we in our last podcast I mentioned I live in Heidelberg in the mountains here in Limpopo, and so over time I've had to figure out how to coach kids all over the country, and also American football kickers in other countries. And so over time I've developed different resources and different methods, and this handbook is just a part of those resources that I use. Oftentimes when I do clinics and coaching camps and stuff like that, I also give these students access to these resources. Learning kicking and kicking technique and the details of it, it's a big endeavor. It's not something that you can learn in a week. It takes a lot of time and dedication, and it takes a detailed and passionate coach to teach these things to students. So it helps if let's say, for instance, I see somebody at a Pretoria clinic in December holidays, and I only see them again in April. They have these resources they can work through themselves, and then they can also send me film that I analyze, and I send them back comprehensive video analysis on their technique and tell them what to work on. And that sort of is the buffer between the times that I see them in person and the next time I would see them in person. But these virtual resources have turned out to be in some ways better than coaching online. In person, because you can go in so much more detail. The kicker can actually see what you're talking about, and they can see what they're doing. And I think that really helps in terms of the learning process, where by comparison, if you're on a field with somebody, sure, in the modern day, you can still film them and stuff like that. But in person on a field has the advantages of being able to fix things right there and then. But the kicker can't really see what they're doing, and they have to sort of envision what you're talking about, where this sort of bridges that gap, and it kind of completes the whole program with in-person lessons, as well as these virtual resources. If it all comes together, it's the most comprehensive way to teach.
André, I haven't spoken a single word to you. Sorry for that. Welcome, yeah. I actually gave you some homework. I gave you this manual. If you don't gave you this manual, asked you to go study it and see what questions comes around. Just give me an idea. What did you think of this manual that Wihan has written?
Mbia, it takes a lot for me to not put a book down. I'm a bit of I can't sit still, but this one I went from front to back in one sitting, and I've done it a couple of times, made a couple of notes on it. I really enjoyed what I was reading, and I think it's purely for the fact that if you had to take, there's a coach called Andy Friend. He was at Connaught. He's coaching the Brumbies women at the moment, and I listened to a podcast of his, and he's got this saying that, you've got your own way of getting to 10. Some guys will go 8 + 2, other guys will go 6 + 4, etc., etc. And I think this is just another way of getting to 10. But I'm excited about this way, and I'm excited to unpack and unravel everything within this book with Wihan.
Right. So now the next question is, are you ready to lead this conversation? Because I'm going to hand it over to you and then sit back and enjoy. Are you happy? Are you ready?
I'm ready. At least it's about kicking and not scrumming.
Yeah, I hear you. All right. So let's, without any further ado, André, Wihan, let's get cracking. Over to you.
Thanks, Mbia. Wihan, just before we start, congratulations on the little boy. They talk about having a new pink foot in the house, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be a Rocketfoot himself. So congratulations.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, like I said, very excited about having a little bit more boy energy in this house. I've been cooped up in here with 2 women, and it's taken its toll. So I'm glad we're equalizing things a little bit.
I feel your pain, my friend. I'm in the same boat. At least you've got some backup at the moment.
Yeah, good stuff.
So, Wihan, just before we start, I'd like to know, when you were introduced to this technique or this way of kicking, obviously it was a lot different to what you were used to. What part of it bit you? Why did you stick to it? What made you excited about it? Or were you forced to keep going because that's the way they kick?
Oh, it's definitely not the way they kick. I think just like in rugby, there's a whole lot of different styles in America. As you would imagine, different kickers that became coaches, and they've all got their own way. ProForm was special to me because it linked up with a lot of things that I already sort of had a nudge towards, like, sort of a connection with. And I really enjoy music, and I don't want to go too deeply into this, but there's a particular band that I listened to growing up, and they use a lot of mathematics in their music. This is kind of wild to connect these two things, but through this band, I learned what the Fibonacci sequence was and what the golden ratio is, and that led me on this other sort of rabbit hole, or down this rabbit hole. And then years later, when I met my college in San Diego, and he started talking about ProForm, he didn't necessarily tell me these things, but I started to see the connections between the things he was talking about and the things that these musicians were talking about. And, the subsequent rabbit hole I went down, and realizing that this golden ratio and Fibonacci sequence was like this source code, and it's embedded in everything. And then I could see it in this kicking technique, and I could see it in the way that Mike would explain things. And that's kind of what made it click. I just immediately knew that this was the truth. If there was such a thing in terms of a kicking technique, to me, this was the truth, and I couldn't leave it alone. It was by no means already complete in terms of its translation of that truth, and I think I've done a lot of work, not improving upon the technique, but understanding the technique and discovering some of these relationships and rules, and yeah, so yeah, that's kind of what got me into it. There's several way many different techniques to kick a football, and you can see it in the NFL. Each guy's got their own style. So what you said at the start, where this is maybe another way to get to 10, that is true, because there is several different ways to kick a ball. That's undeniable. But ProForm is just so special to me because it's just, yeah, like I said, it just speaks to me so deeply.
Yes, and it's so clear within this kicking guide that you've written, this book, how passionate you are about this technique. Now, if you get someone that is not going to see the Fibonacci pattern and is not going to know anything about the golden ratio, what do you think when they do this for the first time? What is one or two things it'll be difficult in the beginning, but there's something that just might go where they'll go, I think I want to keep going with this, although it's not perfect yet. What is that thing? What could that be for a kicker trying to convert, if you want to call it that?
Yeah, I think two parts to this question. I think there is a type of person that this speaks to, evidently. So you do get guys that want to learn this because they, for some other reason, they watch the film of either myself or Henry Now or Mike Hollis or any of the other ProForm guys that are well advanced in the technique, and they see something in it. They recognize some sort of aesthetic, and you get a lot of those guys that become equally obsessed with this technique. The other thing is, and it depends on the age of the kicker. It's definitely a little bit more difficult to start with this when you're older. Like I was 25 when I started learning this stuff, and I had a lot of hurdles to overcome and muscle memory and bad habits and so forth. But with young kids, it's so easy because they're like sponges, and you can literally just like program them like software, and they click really fast, and they immediately see the improvement because they've got access to so much more power and they can kick the ball further. And so for young kickers, it's so easy because that's all they think about. They just want to kick the ball far and high. And so the evidence is there for them very quickly. With older guys that have a little more comprehension of things, if they're clever enough to understand the things that we're talking about, I think it does make sense. And it depends on the person, but oftentimes they see you kick and they want to kick that way, or they just stick through it a little bit, just for a little bit of time, and they do start seeing improvement and the things make sense to them. A lot of the times I do experience, especially kickers in high school, like grade 11, grade 12, who feel like it's maybe not worth the effort to change anything, because they're not willing to make the sacrifice. It's their grade 11 year or grade 12 year. It's a very sensitive time to come into somebody's sporting career and try to mess around with things. So there is definitely that case where boys are apprehensive about learning new stuff because they are afraid they're going to be missing kicks this season, or they're not going to improve, and it's just a sacrifice they're not willing to take. So it's a difficult thing to answer. Very difficult because it's so diverse, because you're working with so many different types of people and personalities and athletic abilities and so forth. But I think there's definitely something to say about the aestheticness of it. When you watch, some of the film, that I put out or that Mike puts out, or other ProForm kickers, most people can recognize that there's something here that's different, and that, I think, is what piques the interest in the first place.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it sometimes feels like you guys are putting sound effects to the kicks, that the way that you kick the ball, and it just comes off the foot like you can't believe. So, that in itself, it's a pity that they can't feel that earlier, because I think that might convince them to actually go through with this process. And just for the viewers, I mean, obviously we're going through your book and we're going through the system, but there's a lot of nuggets in here, and one of them, especially for young kickers, and I'm talking about primary school kickers, the way that you make adjustments for tee height, I think is, and we'll go through that later on in the video, but it'll be good for the primary school coaches, dads, to have a look at that, to understand what happens when you get a high T or a low T. So we'll get to that later. We've got a couple of key points that we want to get to. But before we get there, can you give me a brief description? Explain to me the ProForm system technique and compare it to the techniques that we're used to seeing every day.
Big task here. Okay, so I think the very first thing that one should recognize about what ProForm is that it is a different paradigm of thinking, and there's a reason I say that, and we'll get into that. So there's two fundamental or core concepts that you have to understand if you're learning this technique, and that is, number one, the ultimate objective for the kicker is body position at the moment of impact, and number two, that the ball is the target and the goalposts are the result. And if you're in that paradigm of thinking, you can accomplish the other things that we teach within ProForm. Whereas, in my experience, 99.9% of other kicking techniques that I've listened to on YouTube and Instagram and so forth are all in another paradigm of thinking. And that is that the goalposts are the target, and we need to figure out how to get the ball there. Now, to anybody listening, that sounds crazy because I'm saying that the ball is the target and the goalposts are to a huge degree, or to a large degree, it's almost irrelevant in our process. And let me take you down this journey real quick. So if you kick the ball, it's gonna go somewhere. That's undeniable. Like if you just run and kick the ball as though that's the only thing that you're looking to do, you're not trying to kick it in any particular direction. It's always going to go somewhere. And it's sort of hinged on that idea, is that you can then sort of reverse engineer that and figure out that if you kick the ball with all of your potential, you can calibrate the direction of that through the way in which you set up. And that's kind of what it comes down to. Whereas when you're trying to get the ball to go somewhere, you're doing something different. You're not entirely kicking the ball with all of your potential. There's a shared responsibility between making contact with the ball and considering where you're trying to make the ball go. We call that steering or guiding. This was one of the biggest things that Mike always hammered on when I was working with him, is that he always would say to me, just stop turning. All you're doing, you're just trying to steer and guide the ball. And it took a while for me to click what he was actually trying to say. And within that, I was losing all of this potential. I was losing all of this control and potential, because it's so much more. It requires so much more athletic ability to run in a direction and then turn and then guide and steer your swing and then make contact with the ball and somehow make it go towards the goalpost. Whereas understanding that if you kick the ball in a specific body position with all of your potential going into the ball, not turning towards the goalpost, at least not voluntarily or preemptively before you've made contact with the ball, thus allowing yourself to kick the ball with all of your potential, and then allowing the natural mechanics of your body to create that rotation for you, and then allowing the calibration of the angle and relationship between you and the ball to determine the direction that it's going to go. And that's basically what it comes down to. It's these two paradigms of thinking. One is goalpost target, the other is ball is target. In this school of thinking, in goalpost is target, you have what in respect to what we teach and the way we see it, we see poor body position at impact. And this is due to a number of things, but you touched on it earlier before this episode started, but bigger backswing equals further kicks, maybe to some degree, but it also doesn't allow you to accomplish the best body position possible, because your momentum has to stop because you're waiting for an exaggerated backswing to unravel to kick the ball. In this school of thinking, where ProForm is, quicker foot to ball time, better body position, more momentum transfer, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think the very first thing that anybody has to realize when they're listening to this, or when they're embarking on this journey or learning this, is that it is a completely different paradigm of thinking from any other traditional method. And I might be speaking under correction here, but from my experience and what I've heard and learned through my 10 to 12 years in this kicking industry, it's to me, it's just a complete different way of thinking. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so much to unpack here that to ask you for a brief description is difficult, but I think you nailed it. That the ball is the target mindset. That's a game changer, Wihan. I think if there's one thing that the viewers can take from this and implement it immediately, is changing the way that you see the process and making the ball the target. Johnny Wilkinson used to say, you got to control, the ball is in the middle of a circle. The circle is a meter wide. If you control that circle, you do everything to control that circle, the result will look after itself. So, but that's just easy to say. Your system speaks to making the ball the target. It's not just a principle that you write on your tee, the ball is the target,
No.
stay up. Your system speaks to keeping the ball the target. And then this leads me to my next question. You talk about cognitive load. Now, I love the way that you label this, because we used to talk about this, but I could never get a word or a phrase that accurately describes it like this. And if you make the ball the target, does that have an effect on the cognitive load being put on the kicker?
Absolutely, 100%. 100% does, because you have to do so much less. And you'll know this off by heart. How easy is it to kick the ball out of hand in comparison to a goal kick? If I put you at 50 meters and told you you got 10 goal kicks and you got 10 kicks out of hand, perhaps maybe some of us would be different, but I would probably assume that most guys would, if they were to choose in order to win R1 million, they'd probably choose to kick the ball out of hand. They probably feel they would be more successful and more consistent kicking the ball out of hand than off the ground. Getting to a point here. When the ball is the target and you're kicking it in the way that we're telling you to kick it, it is no different than punting the ball. It's no different than kicking it out of hand. You're using the same muscle groups, using the same mechanics, you're essentially using the same body position. If you watch, we can use the Springboks as examples. If you watch Manie Libbok kick for the touchline, for instance, what muscle group is he using? He's using his quad, he's using the front of his body, he's tall and vertical when he makes contact with the ball, he's swinging forward. It's quite so accurate when he does his cross kicks and things like that. He doesn't even have to look, it's so easy. It's so little cognitive load. And then he goes to his goal kicking and everything changes, because now the ball is no longer the target. When he's kicking out of hand, whether he knows it or not, he's adopting that mindset. The ball is the target, and therefore it's so easy. He's just positioning his body, and then the ball becomes the target. He kicks the ball. Obviously, there's intensity of his contact and how fast his leg is swinging to control distance and so forth. But to a large degree, he's adopting that same sort of mindset, kicking out of hand. And therefore, he's super accurate and consistent. And then we go to goal kicking, and he's got a different thought process involved with that, because he's not made that jump yet. He's not made that connection that it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. And that's the mind-blowing thing. It's just you're hitting the ball in a different location in the swing path. And the next difference is that you're approaching it from an angle, which makes you think you need a turn. And then most kickers turn before they get to the ball. They're already finishing the kick to the target before they've even kicked the ball. And so what we're saying is don't do that. You will turn. Your natural body mechanics will make you turn, because you are landing on a plant foot that's slowing down the left-hand side of the body, and that causes the leverage. And if you're swinging forward and you're not preemptively and forcefully turning your hips, your leg is going to swing forward up until a certain point. It's going to make contact with the ball if you calibrated that correctly at the precise time, and then that rotation will start. You cannot stop that rotation from happening. However, you can delay it, which is what we're trying to do. Because, like you said, we're trying to keep the ball as the target. We're trying to kick the ball first before this rotation happens, this inevitable rotation. And so, yeah, I think I forgot your question, but I think that answers it.
It was the cognitive load one, and it just comes down to the system, to the process, talking to the ball is the target type mindset. And
sorry, yeah, it does reduce the cognitive load. Yeah, sorry, I went on a little bit of a tangent there.
Yeah, I think this rabbit hole might just get bigger and bigger as we go. We might have to do this in a couple of episodes, but we'll try and keep it to one. The next one, as promised, to the dads with the young kids, young players, and the coaches with the young players have kickers. I see so many young kickers kicking off high tees, and obviously it's easier to get it into the air. So we understand the thinking behind that. But the other thing that I don't see is coaches and dads putting emphasis on that plant foot. And I promise you, there's up until today, I didn't understand that plant foot as well as I do because of your book that I read and the adjustments that you can make on those tees. So firstly, if you can just give us the definition of the plant foot depth and the plant foot width, and then we can have a chat on what determines where the depth and where the width should be.
Yeah, sure. So plant foot width is just describing the distance between your plant foot and the ball, and the depth just describes the relationship between, let's just say, the heel of your plant foot. If there was just a parallel line drawn from the heel of your plant foot, that relationship and the ball. So that's depth, and this is width.
And if we talk about, let's start with depth, because depth is determined by tee height, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. In our system. So I'm not too sure how it would work with other methods and turning and all of that stuff, but in the ProForm ball is the target system, because the ball is the target and because we're not turning before we get to the ball, we can afford to run on lines that allow the kicker to end up very, very balanced. I'm not saying that it's impossible for other kickers and other methods to be balanced, but this is more of a natural occurrence because you're running in these particular lines. And so when you're running in those lines and you're swinging forward, the kicking foot is just naturally at its lowest point in the swing path when it passes the heel of the plant foot. So if your plant foot is here, that kicking foot is going to swing and it's going to get to a point here in line with the heel of this foot where it's going to be at its lowest point. That's really where you want to make the contact with the ball that's on the ground. So let's use the ball as it's on the ground as a basis to start off. So that's great contact. If you're kicking a football off the ground, or if you're brave enough to kick a rugby ball off the ground, then that's where you want to make contact. As the ball elevates, you have to move the heel back or the plant foot back and make it shallower, because if your plant foot heel is in line with the back of the ball, but it's elevated, that kicking foot is going to be at its lowest point, and it's just going to hit the tee. You're not going to really make contact with the ball at all, unless you do things with your body position to then suddenly steer or change the natural path of that kicking foot. So the higher the ball goes, elevated off the ground, the shallower that plant foot needs to land in order for you to compensate, in terms of height, because that kicking foot is going to come through that lowest point, and then the upswing is going to start. And so if that tee is elevated, we want to be more shallow so that we go through the low point and then into the high point, or into the upswing, so we can make contact with the ball as it is elevated. And so, so starting right off the ground, if you're kicking a football, we always thought, like when I got to America and these guys were talking about plant foot depth and width and all this stuff, I was like, what are you guys talking about? I have no idea. Just see ball, kick ball. That was kind of my method at that point. Just see the ball and kick it. That's it. And I learned so much from the detail these guys go into. You wouldn't think, like, it's just such a different thing to kick a ball off the ground effectively and efficiently. It's so difficult. It's so incredibly difficult, and it forces you to think deeper about these things. But yeah, that sort of answers your question in terms of that plant foot depth.
Now the reason I'm harping on the younger kickers is because if you think about an under 9 kicker or under 10 kicker, they don't really put angle on their run up. They're quite straight because they want distance. They need to speed up. Now, understanding your system a bit better, it's that 2, 4, 6 kilometers an hour in your run up. They speed up. I think there's a lot to do here for those boys with the high tees. If they move their plant foot back a bit, I think they kick the ball further.
100%, definitely. because if they're landing in a plant foot that's, let's say, level with the ball, which naturally would occur, your brain would just naturally make that happen. They have to compensate with body position in order to keep that foot in a position where it can make contact with the ball, and that sacrifice is what's stealing from their potential. So if they get that plant foot shallow, man, they can let it go. They can really let that swing go, and they can make really good contact and generate a lot of force without interruption. I think that's the key point here, is that if that plant foot's too deep and the tee's too high and the ball's too high, there's going to be an interruption in that flow, because there's a sudden steering that needs to happen, or a sudden compensation or control shift of some sort that needs to happen to ensure that foot is in the right place to make contact with the ball. But I would suggest, and my suggestion would be to try to get kids to, and this is difficult because, I mean, I've worked with hundreds of youngsters before. They all want to kick the ball as high and far as possible. They don't care about anything else. But if you're a dad or a coach out there, it is advisable. I mean, there is a certain height of a tee that is acceptable with our method and our process. But once it gets too high, there's just so much more that you need to do, and the things that you need to do it's just sort of counterintuitive to good body position, good posture, and good flow. And so the suggestion I would have is to have kids sort of graduate, make them see the lower tees as more of a accomplishment. So they start off a higher tee and they kind of graduate through this process until they can kick the ball off the ground. And I've said this before, kicking a ball off the ground will teach you to solve problems that you didn't know existed when you're using a tee. And in the process, in doing so, you're teaching yourself things that you would have never known in comparison.
Yeah, man, I think you need to get to those youngsters while they've still got a lot implementing more of your system than what they're seeing on the TV. And, it's less work to try and convert a 19-year-old than to get an 8-year-old to just do what he's naturally doing at the moment, just do it better. Yeah. So we're on plant foot depth now. So width, what determines your plant foot width?
It is all relative, because we are maybe different heights, or my legs are longer than yours, and a 9-year-old's leg is way shorter than mine. So width is really determined relative to the person itself. And so what we do is we measure the length of the leg, and we have a formula that figures out exactly the width that plant foot needs to be away from the ball, or wider, in relationship to the ball, for the body to be perfectly balanced and the kicking foot to be in the exact correct place to swing forward and make contact with the ball. And so that width is so important, because without plant foot width, without the correct amount of width, you will be off balance. The ultimate balance that you can have during a kick, ironically, is when you're kicking the ball off the ground, because you can afford to be that wide. And the wider that plant foot is, the more naturally balanced your body is. You'll just naturally be more level. If you think about a spirit level across your shoulders, that spirit level reads level when your feet are wide, like, in relation to one another. And so if your plant foot is wide and you're making contact with the ball sort of, on the outside here, now you're in a balanced position. But again, that tee, as the tee raises, that plant foot needs to come in because the ball's higher. And so you got to sort of almost lean slightly to your left in order to make that kicking foot naturally just higher in the swing path. So you can, again, make contact with the ball on the tee. Again, you can afford to get away with certain things. Like, you can be slightly off balance and it's okay. Like, it won't be a disaster. But again, let's go back to ball on the ground. You can't afford to be off balance with regards to ProForm system, because you'd hit the ball way too high and you just drive it downfield, or your kicks would be blocked. So if you're kicking a rugby ball and you're kicking off a tee, you've got one or two choices. You can either be ultimately balanced, like perfectly balanced, and then the ball needs to be very low or on the ground, or you're sacrificing some of that balance to have the ball elevated and you're slightly off balance as a result of that. But yeah, that's kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's great images. I think, for, again, coaches, dads, you're giving such clear visuals, and we haven't even touched the blueprint yet. So I think let's get stuck into that one.
It's the Out the Box Rugby podcast with André Pretorius and Envia Velman, only on Megaphone Rugby.